In part 1 of this video, I discovered the most prevalent plum profile talents among my sample of 32 former, current, and incoming capital markets interns. As a reminder, the most common talents were execution, managing others, and communication. As mentioned in my last video, the plum profile only displays talents which are exclusively presented in a positive way. Welcome to part 2 of my study, where I deploy a secondary personality test called the Hexaco that reports on some spicy personality traits. You probably never heard of the Hexcode Test before, and that's because it is not a talent assessment platform. It is a personality test created by Kibbian Lee, PhD, and Michael C. Ashton, PhD, from the University of Calgary and Brock University, respectively, and used by researchers all over the world. Unlike the plum profile, the Hexcode test includes a bit of spice by introducing an additional personality trait called honesty, humility. If you've taken a psychology class, you're probably familiar with the big 5 personality traits: emotionality, extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and openness to experience. The Hexcode test can be thought of the big 5 plus 1, and that plus 1 is honesty, humility. The Hexcode test scores participants on a scale from 1 to 5 on 6 main dimensions, hence the hexagon. These dimensions are honesty, humility, extroversion, emotionality, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and openness to experience. Within these dimensions, there are subdimensions, such as sincerity, fairness, greed avoidance, and modesty, all under honesty, humility. I got students to complete the 100-item test, in which they answered simple questions using a scale from 1 to 5, 1 being strongly disagree, and 5 being strongly agree. An example question is, I would be quite bored by a visit to an art gallery. Respondents answered 100 of these questions using the 1 to 5 scale and submitted their completed tests back to me. I then scored the tests and sent each participant their individual results. Fortunately, Hexcode researchers have already collected tests from thousands of Canadian undergraduate students, and so I could easily compare my sample to theirs. The results? Did I find that capital markets interns are significantly less sincere, fair, or modest? Do they tend to avoid greed less than the average Canadian undergraduate student? Contrary to popular belief, my sample actually scored significantly higher than the average Canadian undergraduate student on fairness and modesty. The fairness portion I can see, as some may consider capital markets as the closest thing to meritocracy. Or at least that's what Harper thinks from HBO's show Industry. In my opinion, there will always be factors like representation, mentorship, and sponsorship that will keep any industry from being a complete meritocracy. But in capital markets, the P&L is clear, and it does not lie. On the other hand, I am quite shocked by the modesty results. In my opinion, capital markets interns are not always arrogant, but they are proud of the work that they've done to secure such sought-out positions. I wonder if this result is truly accurate, and if it would change if I were to consider the honest opinions of a participant's close family and friends. A downside to using only the self-reported version of the Hexaco is that participants may inflate scores of certain traits like honesty, humility, and modesty. Finally, the sample of capital markets interns scored significantly lower on creativity than the Canadian undergraduate average. This is consistent with the plum profile and the rarity of the talent innovation. In my experience, the opportunity to be creative as an analyst only arises once it is proven the day-to-day work can be done perfectly. And so perhaps creativity is not a trait that recruiters or capital markets teams initially look for. To conclude the results, I want to share some correlations that may illustrate the buckets Canadian undergraduate students may fall into.
In terms of the Plum profile, those that scored high on adaptation also scored high on innovation, but scored low on communication and teamwork.
This makes sense, as to be adaptive, you must be creative to invent solutions in ambiguous and dynamic situations. However, those that are highly adaptive may keep to themselves when navigating such active environments, justifying their low communication and teamwork.
The second correlation is that those that scored high on communication also scored high on teamwork, but scored low on innovation and execution.
Once again, this is intuitive, as communication and teamwork go together hand in hand. On the flip side, perhaps those that are extremely strong at communicating are not so strong at actually doing. Thus, their innovation and execution talents act as trade-offs for their superior communication skills. Now, the next correlation may be the most notable.
Those that scored high in conflict resolution also scored high on teamwork, but scored low on managing others, persuasion, and decision-making. Remember that managing others, persuasion, and decision-making are some of the most common talents among the sample size.
Thus, maybe conflict resolution is not the most beneficial talent to possess, as it comes at a hefty expense of 3 very valuable talents.
The final correlation is that those who scored high on innovation scored low on managing others and persuasion.
This isn't a surprise, as innovation is a doer talent, while persuasion and managing others are more interpersonal talents.
Now, here's the good part. My supervising professor, Kevin Veenstra from the DeGroote School of Business, helped me to run some analysis to determine the relationship between Plum profile talents and Hexcode dimensions. There were predictable ones, of course, like the positive correlation between Plum's communication and Hexaco's extroversion. However, there are 2 correlations worth their own spotlight. The Plum profile talent persuasion demonstrated some strong and possibly controversial correlations. Those that scored high on Plum profile's persuasion tend to score significantly low on Hexaco's agreeableness and conscientiousness dimensions. As a fellow Plum profile persuasion recipient, I can confirm the former, but not the latter, applies to me.
Yes, I did score lower than average on agreeableness, but my conscientiousness is up to par.
The second correlation I want to highlight is one between the Plum profile talent embracing diversity and Hexaco's emotionality. This suggests that the talent embracing diversity is almost synonymous with the concept of empathy.
This may become a problem, as without empathy, diverse talent won't feel recognized and likely will seek other workplaces in which this is not the case. In summary, what does this all mean? Does it mean that if you don't possess execution, managing others, and communication in your Plum profile, that your career in capital markets is over before it started? Does it mean that according to the Hexcode test, if you are not significantly more fair than your peers, that you just don't fit the bill for these types of roles? Or that if you're extremely creative, will you feel trapped as a capital markets analyst? Here's the thing. The sample was small, just 32 students from my inner circle. Can any concrete conclusions be drawn from this study? No, but it does provide insight on the personality of the average capital markets intern in Canada in 2022. So what if you do match the archetype outlined by this study? Perhaps you'll have an easier time recruiting, as those similar to you have previously landed offers themselves. Now, if you don't match the archetype, it does not mean you're doomed. You may have a more difficult time recruiting right now if you are less extroverted and more team-oriented. However, I strongly believe that with curiosity and demonstrated knowledge in capital markets, an opportunity will eventually present itself. Additionally, as capital markets recruiting works to become more inclusive, traits that are less prevalent right now may hold significant value in the future. So, Canadian undergraduate students looking to break into capital markets, my advice to you is to use your personality as one component of your application. It may be a stronger component of your application or a weaker one based on the current status quo. However, always remember that your previous experience, grades, involvement, coffee chats, and technical knowledge are all components of your application, and when evaluated holistically, can help you land that offer.